So welcome to your first lesson of Cycle 3. And in this lesson, we're going to be going over how to solve equations that have fractions in them. You've seen some of these before in Cycle 2, but we just are going to go over these in more detail now. So it's important to know that if you have any terms with no denominator, you would have to give them a denominator of 1. So that does not apply in this example, but if you do have a question and there is a term with no denominator, give it a denominator of 1. And if there's any fraction that has more than one term in the numerator, put the brackets around them if there aren't already brackets there. So for instance, in this first example, that numerator has more than one term, so you should put brackets around it. So after that, the first step is going to be to determine the lowest common denominator of the fractions, of the denominators. So LCD stands for lowest common denominator, and our denominators are 4, 2, and 8. And the smallest number that is divisible by 4, 2, and 8 is 8. So that's the lowest common denominator. The second step is to multiply the numerator and the denominator in the fractions by whatever number that would change those denominators into the lowest common denominator. So what that means is you're going to take each of these fractions. So for instance, the first fraction has a denominator of 4. So to change it to a denominator of 8, you would have to multiply 4 by 2 to get 8. So that means you have to multiply top and bottom by 2. So when you write this out, you want to remember that you have to keep the equal signs lined up. So the first fraction, which is 3x minus 1 over 4, that has to be multiplied top and bottom by 2. Because if you multiply top and bottom by 2, then that means that the denominator will change to 8. The next fraction is x over 2, and in order to change that into a denominator of 8, you have to multiply top and bottom by 4. And lastly, on the right side, 3 over 8, it already has a denominator of 8, so you do not have to multiply the top and bottom by anything. So all we did was write the exact same equation, and then for each term, you're going to multiply the top and bottom by whatever number you have to make a lowest common denominator of 8. So this fraction here gets multiplied top and bottom by 2, and this fraction here, top and bottom gets multiplied by 4. And the third fraction, you don't have to multiply by anything because it already has a denominator of 8. So now when you write that out, in the first term, you've got in the numerator 2 times bracket 3x minus 1, and the denominator is now 8. And in the second term, the numerator is now 4 times x, which is 4x, and that's over 8. And on the right side, it still stays 3 over 8. Then it says, now that the denominators are the same, you can cross them all out. So as soon as all of the denominators are the same, you can just cross them all out. And then you are just left with an equation that we had last cycle. So no more denominators. Now you're going to solve them the same way that we did in Unit 3. So first thing, use the distributive law to simplify and remove brackets if needed. So that means this part here, use the distributive law to expand those brackets. So 2 times 3x is 6x, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, and then plus 4x. And on the right side, we just have 3. Then what you're going to do is to collect like terms if needed. So on this side, the 6x and the 4x are like terms. So you can change that to 6x plus 4x is 10x. Minus 2 equals 3. Then, if there are constant terms on each side, remove the constant term on one side by performing the opposite operation. So on the left side, we have to remove the constant term. So the opposite operation of minus 2 is to add 2 to both sides. So then you get 10x equals 5. Now, if there was a variable on both sides, you'd have to remove the variable from the other side, just like we did in cycle 2, but there isn't a variable on both sides, so we can skip that step for this question. So then the last thing is to divide both sides by the coefficient of the variable. So the coefficient is 10. Divide both sides by 10. And you want to remember that your answers have to be fractions, and if applicable, improper fractions in lowest terms. No decimals. So 5 over 10 in lowest terms would be 1/2. And that is your solution.